I have a problem. I've been making videos about my drawing process for a little while now. Each of these videos' main goal was to show off my illustration process in a hopefully entertaining light. However, whenever I would show someone one of my drawings, they would often ask, "Is this some part of a world building project?" And I would have to answer, "Nah, it's just a one-off thing." And then I would watch the light fade from their eyes as they realized they weren't going to get any sick lore drops that evening. Well, that all changes today, as I'm going to show you how I created my own fantasy world map from scratch. My goal for this video is to create a map of a bespoke fantasy world complete with different biomes and environments. That map will provide the setting for my next few illustrations and character designs. Just like my previous projects, I'll create and draw the creatures and critters that live in this world for everyone's viewing pleasure. Along with that, I'll be looking for a spot to place a human settlement that will be exploring this new plane and meeting a terrible fate at the hands of these creatures and critters. My first attempt at creating a map for my custom world was this scribble on my iPad. Being a novice, I thought, that looks good. You got a starting point down here, put some mountains on this choke point, and maybe there's some deserts and stuff up there. But in my heart, I knew in order to bring this to life for you, I needed to be more robust in my approach. I needed to figure out the difference between a bunch of scribbles on a piece of paper and a believable world map. First, it needed to be decided how fantastical the nature of the world I'm building is. I could do something like the map for Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, where the areas are just kind of thrown together. Paper Mario is a universe where the nocturnal Twilight folk live in a pipe underneath a pirate town and its pro wrestling arena, so the lack of realism fits. Then, on the other end, there's something like The Witcher that has an entirely coherent map with believable rivers and mountains that are governed by real environmental action. Velen is a swamp because the river system, geography, and weather around it make it a swamp, even though that swamp is filled to the brim with drowners, ghouls, and grave hags. Then there's my personal favorite fantasy world, A Song of Ice and Fire, where a lot of the magical elements are in the background, but the size of the features of the world are a lot bigger, like you get mega big mountains and a mega big wall. For my world, I wanted to keep the initial geological inputs coherent and reflective of the real world, with tectonic activity, coherent river systems, and biomes that are formed in the same way as on Earth. But once I get into the specific illustrations of those environments, I'll have those systems shaped by magical versions of the real patterns. Like, it rains on this world, but it's magic spirit rain. Alright, so we've got the general vibe established, so now I can actually go about building the map. However, an immediately apparent issue is that I have no idea how land, oceans, or mountains actually form. I was lucky that a YouTuber named Madeline James had an entire series that details exactly how a layman like me can go about creating a believable fantasy map from scratch. The series begins with creating initial land masses, either moving them out from an initial Pangean supercontinent or just making your own random shapes. Then, you calculate tectonic activity by drawing a bunch of fault lines on your map and determining if they are convergent, divergent, or sliding parallel to each other. Then, you add in the effects of glaciation, which means marking down where the last glacial maximum was on your map, which means your last ice age, and determining the effects of that. For some reason, this part sparks a lot of joy for me. Ancient glaciers get so heavy they create giant divots in the land that create unique lowland environments even thousands of years later. Then comes calculating elevation, which is the vibes-based science of looking at all your mountain regions and asking yourself if they look like the Andes Mountains or more like the Himalayas. Then you calculate the climate regions based on the latitude of each landmass and the relative air circulation. Climate regions are just how hot, cold, dry, or rainy an area on the map is. Like, big mountains will block rain, creating rain shadows, which are arid climate regions that often become dry deserts. Finally, once the climate regions are established, you can plot out the biomes on your map, which is the goal of doing all of this. For our purposes, once we map out the biomes, that will allow me to choose which part of the map I'm most excited to place goblins in. After completing a practice set of continents to get a handle on things, I created 6 initial landmasses as candidates to build the world from. For number 1, I rearranged some shapes from a random island in the Antarctic because I thought it looked cool. For number 2, I used the same initial shapes from number 1, but moved them into a different arrangement. For number 3, I traced shapes from a bunch of coffee stains that I threw onto an old sketchbook for a little bit more of a random starting point. 4 through 6, I decided to be a little bit more wacky and created landmasses that would not have formed on a traditional planet. Number 4, I copied an Ouroboros shape to have this cyclical landform and placed a Vardenfell-like island in the middle. 5 and 6, I went even further and based their shapes on esoteric symbolism, Jacob Boehm's model of the universe, and William Blake's cosmic egg painting, respectively. I took these thumbnails and messaged everyone I know to choose their favorites. They were both partial to 4 and 1 as the most successful attempts. I chose to continue with 4 since I think the more unusual shape of that landmass better communicates we're in a sort of mythical world. With number 4 in hand, I went through Madeline James's world building process again and started building it out. I drew in some plate tectonics and marked the direction of the fault lines to get areas of valleys, ridges, and mountains of various sizes. The island along the equator has the biggest mountain range, and the eastern landmasses have smaller, steeper ranges where the oceanic and continental crust meet. I also added a hotspot island chain to the far east. Hotspot island chains form from magma from the mantle spilling out onto the Earth's surface, and that feels like a good candidate for a fiery demon area. With the mountains established, I made an elevation map to determine the lowland areas versus the highland and plateau areas. I wanted to have a mix of flatter land masses and ones that had more elevation variation, hoping that one of these places would do something cool once I got into mapping the actual biomes that exist in this place. So once that's done, it allows me to move on to the climate regions. This is the part I was most nervous about. I was afraid I would end up with oops all deserts or something, but I'm generally happy with the variety around here. Constructing the rivers was an important step for me. I really like wetland and swamp type biomes, so I really wanted to make sure I understood how rivers formed so I could place some babbling brooks around the map. Rivers descend from places of high elevation to places of low elevation where there's snow melt and precipitation. So I placed some streams around the map so I can choose from them later on. So finally, with all the elevation and climates and rivers established, we can finally accomplish what all this was leading up to, mapping out the specific biomes on this world, like deserts, forest, tundras, etc. I walked through each individual region on each landmass following Madeline James's video to the best of my ability. I am sure these are probably wrong in a wide variety of ways, but at the end of the day, we have some continents that have temperate broadleaf forests and steppe prairies, so who can complain? Once again, I wanted to zoom into a specific part of the map that will be the focus of the next few illustrations, in order to keep the scope of this project to completable in one human lifetime. There's a lot of options to choose from, like this landmass here that begins as a rainforest before it transitions into a desert and a large marine forest area, or the southern landmass, which has bands of grassland before it opens up to a variety of forested areas. But the part of the map I liked the best was the northeast area up here. We have areas of a temperate broadleaf forest that I like as a normal forest that can provide a baseline for the people to live before they move on to more extreme regions. I can place a grassland to the south as well to provide some sort of farming area for them as well. There's a glacial lowland that would create a fun bog area, a marine forest that would be gray and misty like the Pacific Northwest, that then leads to subarctic boreal forests to the north. We also have mountainous regions far to the south and a little tease of the heavily rainforested center island. I zoomed into that area of the world and started to actually draw a real map, taking the blob of initial biome mapping and outlining a more believable landmass. Certain aspects of the map, like the fjordy coasts, give a clue as to how far north these people are, but places like the center island and the southern landmass are uncharted. After drawing the outline, I added icons to denote the different regions of forest and mountains, as well as making more specific decisions on where those biomes actually are. Technique-wise, I'm trying to make pen strokes that are continent-like, if that makes sense. I wanted to get the feeling that this is a cartographer in this world drawing this map. I jotted down a star on the map in order to pin down where the settlement of people here are actually going to live. It's off a coastal area with a grassland next to it so the citizens here can farm and eat and all of that. I'll also have to figure out how this group of people got to this magical plane, but that is also for next time. At first I was going to move on to some watercolor shading, but I wanted to redo the trees on the map to make the distinction between each biome more clear. For each forest type, I drew a couple of trees and flipped and resized them in order to give an impression of each distinct forest type. I also added in a new river flowing from this larger lake. I wanted a reason for the swamp area, as marked by these drooping trees, to exist, so that when these people traveled northward, they would have to intersect with the spooky swamp. Most everything is filled out on the map. Now it's just about finishing touches like adding blue to the rivers, filling in all the extra land masses, and adding white snow caps to the mountains here. For a final touch, I made a real asset out of the map so it looks like a thing you can hold in your hand. I drew a little square of chewed up canvas and inked the outline before adding in some brushstrokes to give it a worn and weathered feel. Then I placed the map in there with some overlay layers to make it look painted on. And really, that's the map. I consider this thing very fluid at the moment. We now have specific environments that I can work with, but I still need to figure out what these places are going to look like and what creatures are going to live there. I have various ideas, but to prevent this from turning into me rambling about magic nerd nonsense, I'll just say that the plan is now to draw out the path the explorers of this world are going to be taking. Starting with the main city here, they'll move into the hinterlands of this temperate forest region, then into the swamps, marine forests, and either into the snowy northern regions or the islands and seas to the east. I have not decided yet. That's pretty much all I have for this time. I'm excited to dig in here and start creating these characters and settings. Next time we're going to be taking on the city that these people live in and start developing the faction that has invaded this magical world. Thank you for watching.